Good morning. There have been enormous advances in medicine over the past few decades, but there's a wonderful saying that you're climbing the ladder to success to find you're on the wrong wall. And I think in many ways we have been on the wrong wall, because really the best treatment of heart disease, the best treatment of cancer, the best treatment of all of our modern diseases is not to get them in the first place. It's called prevention. And really the best preventative strategy we have is happiness. And I believe that happiness, peace and contentment are easily the best drugs on the planet. And I want to give you my 5 keys to happiness. And if you think of it logically, everything's in 5s. You've got 5 digits, you've got 5 senses, there are 5 seasons if you count Frankie Valli. Everything's in 5s. So let's go through those. The first key is control. It's the control we have over our own lives. And I want to tell you a story about this man here, when he comes up. Viktor Frankl. Over 60 years ago, Viktor Frankl wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. And Vic was in a particularly good position to talk about stress and suffering because he was tortured in a Nazi concentration camp for a couple of years. And he got out of the camp and his mate said, Vic, you've got to be angry. You've got to want to get revenge on these people. Let me give you one very important point. You want revenge on anyone, dig 2 graves. So Vic said, look, it was the worst 2 years of my life. It was enormous suffering. They could make me suffer, they could torture me, but what they couldn't do was take away my right to choose how I wanted to react to them. I want to tell you about a very simple story from my own practice. A beautiful man called Ken. Ken had every reason to complain about his life. He'd had bypass surgery, which is a big deal, many people have that, but that was the least of Ken's problems. He had a thing called muscular dystrophy, which I'm sure you all know about, couldn't use his muscles properly. And again, that was probably the least of Ken's problems because he was clinically blind as well. And Ken used to catch a couple of buses and a train to come to my clinic, and he'd say, oh, Dr. Walker, it's such a privilege to be one of your patients. I said, no, Ken, it's such a privilege to be in the same room as you. This man used to get up every morning, lived in Leichhardt, caught a bus into the city and used to help the Catholic priests serve Mass. I said, Ken, what do you do this for? He said, oh, doctor, living is such a privilege. I feel I've got to contribute. And what Viktor Frankl said, what Ken says, it's not the suffering that's important, but the way you handle the suffering. So the first point is control. I want you to be an active participator on this world. Take control of the only thing you can take control of, you. It's no one else's responsibility to make you happy. It's your responsibility. That's number 1, control. Number 2 is commitment. I want you to have a commitment to living now. Be emotionally up to date. Do not practice woundology. What's woundology? Woundology is when you walk around with this wound on your sleeve from some trauma you've had many years ago for everyone to see. There is not one person in this room who hasn't been traumatized by something in their life. And I can tell you probably the greatest healing thing you can do, not for the person who is the perpetrator of your trauma, but for yourself, is to forgive and move on. Send love to that person. Send forgiveness. No matter what they've done, I promise you it's healing for you. For you. Have a commitment to living now. One important way to be able to do all of these things is to spend a half an hour every day in silence. For the last 20 years, I've been meditating every single day. I did it this morning and I will do it tomorrow morning. And I couldn't imagine a life without meditation. Many studies have shown 50 to 60% reduction in many different diseases by the regular practice of meditation, and that's the least important reason to meditate. It opens up your mind to different things, it makes you calmer, and it certainly helps you achieve happiness. The third point here is challenge. See every day that you live as a challenge. See every situation you're in as a test. Now, you may recognise one of these very handsome men on the stage, but on this slide, but the other fellow is my brother. My brother's a bit of an idiot, really. He only has a PhD in pure philosophy. He speaks 8 languages and his hobby is Middle Kingdom hieroglyphics. And until last July, he was the headmaster of the King's School in Rochester in Kent and had been there for 26 years. And what blew me away about this is I had the honour of being the final lecturer in his school's wait for this, 1400th year anniversary. And my brother, when I went to the school, he took me on a tour of the school. There's over 600 students, 150 staff, and my brother knows all of them. This is the challenge, ladies and gentlemen. He'd take me to George the gardener. He'd say, Ross, this is George. When George came to the school 7 years ago, the gardens were a bit shabby, but since George has been here, the gardens are magnificent. And then, and George would go, oh, thank you, sir, thank you, sir. And then we'd go to someone else, and he'd give me a potted history of their contribution to the school, and I'm blown away by this leadership. But then this boy, who was probably in about year 10, walked around the corner, and my brother goes, Hamish, just straight away, split-second recognition. And the boy looked up at my brother goes, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. Now, I was blown away by this because that is leadership. So what I'm saying to you, see every situation you're in your life as a test of you, not of anyone else. It's got nothing to do with anyone else. You see it often. You're sitting in a restaurant with a fellow human being called a waiter or a waitress leaning over you to get your plate. Does it really hurt for you to stand there, pick up the plate, turn to that person, look them in the face and say thank you? It's a small gesture, but it says a lot about you. Every situation as a test. When the flowers are arriving at the front door, the robbers are leaving by the back door. What do I mean by that? I mean sometimes wonderful things happen in life, sometimes horrible things happen. Happens to all of us. But it's how you're reacting behind your eyes that are the most important. The fourth element here is connectedness. The connectedness we feel to each other. We're all in this together. There is no, there's you, there's me. We're in this together. We're all contributing. This is my dad, and I always get a bit choked up when I talk about Dad. Dad died well over 15 years ago. Now, I've got to say, ladies and gentlemen, some people have a fear of public speaking. I have a fear of not public speaking. I have a fear of not being asked. But when I found out, and thank you, Anthony. So when I found out Dad was dying and he was going into the terminal phase of his cancer, I dreaded every day to his funeral because I knew I'd stand there in front of everyone and break down about 5 or 6 times because of the feelings I had about Dad. And when I said at the start, climbing the ladder to success to find you're on the wrong wall, my dad was on the right wall. He didn't have a title in front of his name. He didn't have degrees after his name. He didn't drive a flash car or live in a big house. But he taught me 3 magnificent principles. The principles of devotion, loyalty, and unconditional love. And wouldn't it be wonderful if that's all we were all remembered for? He taught me the importance of being loved and supported, what I could do for other people, not what I could suck out of the situation for myself. He taught me that beautiful spiritual connection. I'm not talking religion here, but you do know what would happen if you took all the people who fell asleep at church and laid them end to end, they'd be a lot more comfortable. I'm talking about the fact that we're one big organism. And then finally, the final thing here, and probably the most important, is our capacity. It's our capacity to respond to the unexpected, the uninvited, and the unimaginable. And I think the hardest lessons in life are really our best teachers. And I was privileged, absolutely privileged, that my hardest lesson came when I was very young. This gentleman here was my best friend at high school. 1 week before the final exams, he drowned in a swimming pool. And that was it for me. Plunged myself into my own grief, couldn't study, I was going to fail, that was the end of it. But what I didn't count on was his grandfather. His grandfather, I believe, was one of the greatest ever Australians, and some people in this audience would know him, or would have known of him, as a fellow by the name of Sir Lorimer Dodds. Sir Lorimer started the Children's Medical Research Foundation in Sydney. And I'd met Sir Lorimer. He was one of those beautiful, wise old men. You walk into the room with this man, he just exuded this peace and wisdom. And he had this extraordinary ability to make people feel comfortable. But you'd forgive a grandfather at his grandson's funeral for wanting to plunge himself into his own grief. But Sir Lorimer stood there with the dignity he always displayed, thanking everyone for coming. I walked out and he said, Ross, I need to speak to you. He said, you and Jack were going to do medicine. Now you have to do it for both of you. And can you imagine at the age of 17 being hit between the eyes with that number? So there I was. I had to make a decision to keep feeling sorry for myself, plunging myself into my own grief, or living for 2 people. And I'm still living my life for 2 people. I'm still practicing medicine for 2 people. I'm still speaking in these wonderful forums for 2 people. And it's not a burden, it's a privilege. It's an absolute privilege. And that's how we should see life. Life is a privilege. And what I want you to do is to go into every moment of your life. Forget about what happened yesterday. All you have is right now. Go into every moment and say to yourself, I choose peace over this. I'm not going to give you the power to cause my heart attack. And most importantly, go into every moment with the attitude, how may I serve? Not what can I suck out of this for me? Confucius once said, a journey of 1,000 steps begins with a single step. You should see every part of your life as a micro experience. And in that micro experience, you can either choose to be happy, choose to be healthy, or choose to be unhappy or unhealthy. Happiness, peace and contentment are easily the best drugs on the planet. It's your choice. Thank you.